This is the High School Football America podcast for June the 10th, 2021, and I'm Jeff Fisher. The High School Football America podcast is brought to you by GameStrat, America's premier sideline instant replay system with outstanding reliability, faster speed than Huddle Sideline, plus GameStrat has awesome customer service along with different plans priced right for every coach's budget. And if you mention High School Football America when you go for that demo, well, you're going to get a deep discount on your upcoming season's fees. To get a demo, go to GameStrat or click on the GameStrat banner ad located on every page of highschoolfootballamerica.com. All right, going to be joined right now on the High School Football America podcast by author Hank Gola. I just finished his wonderful book, City of Champions. Came out a couple of years ago, but I highly recommend you go out and get this because, well, you know, we're going to have our High School Football America preseason 100 coming out. You know, we crown mythical national champs, but back in 1939, yes, folks, way before I was born, even though I'm an old guy right now, Garfield High School out of New Jersey took on Miami High, and on Christmas night, 1939, for a mythical national championship where teams actually got to go head-to-head, and Hank Gola has written about it in the book City of Champions, and he is on the line right now to talk about what was as I read it, Hank, it felt like a labor of love, but thanks for joining us, and I look forward to talking to you about the book.
Yeah, it was, and you know, I spent 4 years researching and writing it, and I basically got myself back into 1939. Every time I sat in front of the microfilm reader, it was like, you know, putting myself back in time. That was my time machine. And I listened to 1940s radio on Sirius XM. I think my grandson is the only 3-year-old Glenn Miller fan.
I love it. Well, I grew up on big band radio, AM radio in Easton, Pennsylvania. I mean, that was 1970s, and they were already going back. That was old back then, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Hank,
I love the big bands myself. So,
yeah, no,
I grew up in Garfield.
Yeah,
and so I grew up with this story. And then I finally had a chance to basically write a big piece for the New York Daily News where I was working, and I had so much left over. I said I could turn this into a book, so I did.
And it's wonderful, folks. It is available Amazon and wherever you can buy books online. City of Champions. And Hank, before we get into the book itself, I guess for the listeners out there, the first question is going to be, because again, you know, our national rankings are coming out. We crown mythical national champs, just like USA Today and Max Preps. I guess the big question, 1939, how'd this game come about?
Well, back then, as today, everybody wants to know who's the best, right? Yep. And this started when high school football started in the 19-teens. Well, in 1939, the National Sports Council, which was chaired by Grantland Rice, was formed to raise money for Franklin Roosevelt's Infantile Paralysis Foundation, which later became the March of Dimes. And of course, FDR was a polio victim himself. Polio was raging then among the youth in America. And they were going to use the proceeds of various sporting events around the country to put toward the fight against polio. And this was going to be the flagship. They were going to have a national championship of high school football. And basically that's how it came about. They picked Miami was always going to be the Southern team. Miami High School was a powerhouse in the South. In fact, it's funny when you think about how Florida might be the greatest state for high school. I know Texas and Pennsylvania will argue, but so many great high school players come out of Florida. There's so many great high school teams in Florida. Well, back then, Miami High School had to go out of the state to find competition. So they played a regional schedule against Atlanta and teams from Charlotte and Savannah, Knoxville, Tennessee. They were all over the place just to find teams that were competitive with them. And they were pretty much the out-and-out best team in the South. And since the game was going to be played in the Orange Bowl, which was only like 4 years old at the time, Miami was going to get the game. The problem was selecting a northern team, and that eventually went to Garfield out of a great deal a very circuitous route for Garfield to that game.
I can imagine everybody clamoring to get that spot. Talking with author Hank Gola on the High School Football America podcast, his book City of Champions. I did finish it. 400-plus pages, Hank. You tested me during a very long 2021 high school football season. I was sneaking it in. If I was doing a soak to relax and all that, the book was in my hands, and I got it done, and we're glad to have you on the podcast today. So, we found out why the game, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what did get you fired up to, really kind of delve into what truly may have been the best interstate high school football game before that started happening somewhere in the 2000s?
Yeah, well, as I said, I knew about this game from when I was a kid. If you grew up in Garfield, as I did, and Garfield was always a sports town, mostly a football town, but every sport really. And you would know, if your father was from Garfield, he would give you the story. Before you even learned about the birds and the bees, you learned that Garfield beat Miami to win the national championship when Benny Babula kicked the winning field goal in Miami Christmas night. So that was in my head. It was the first thing I even knew about sports. Before I knew anything else, I knew that. So it was in there. And then when I decided to turn it into a book and I started researching it, it was like every little thing led to something else that was just piqued my curiosity. And that's why the book not only deals with the football game itself and the two teams, but I tried to put these two teams within the historical context. It's kind of a greatest generation in the making book. These are kids coming out of the Depression, going into the war, and of course I follow them into the war later, some of their exploits and heroics in the war. A couple of them were killed in the war. But it was fascinating to me, and I just couldn't stop research. I kind of researched it out. I exhausted my research. Mm-hmm. And that's why it came out to 400 pages.
But the great thing about it is...
I didn't want to leave anything out. That's what it was. I mean, I had so much great stuff. I said, well, I got to put it in here. It was like uncovering buried treasure to me, things that people wouldn't know, really, unless they read this book.
It's like a high school football geologist in some ways, or an archaeologist, or whatever it may. You kept digging and digging and digging. So Hank, one of the things that I love about it is, and you did do an awesome job with the research, but that those firsthand accounts when I wrote my book about the Texas high school football players and all that, it's getting it right from the horse's mouth, and you have a lot in there. So tell me how that kind of all developed, because again, as I said at the beginning, 1939. I'm 60 years old. I'm an old guy, but I'm not that old. It's even before my mom was born. So how did it happen that you got so many kind of firsthand accounts, if you will?
Well, there were only two surviving players that I was able to talk to for really good stuff. There was one other surviving player who was in a veterans home, but he pretty much had dementia, and I got a couple of things out of him. But Walter Young, who was on the Garfield team, was in his early 90s, and this guy was as sharp as anything, and it was great. I would talk to him. We would do who had the book? Mitch Albom, Tuesdays with Maury. I had Fridays with Walter. Basically, we'd sit down and we'd spend an hour and a half together and just talk and laugh. And he became a very good friend. Unfortunately, he passed away. But really, we forged a really great friendship over the book. And then there was Harvey Comfort from Miami, and I made a trip down to Florida to talk to him, and I got some good stuff out of him. But then also I would talk to family members and then people who just went to the games, and anybody who I could reach out to who would help me with just the slightest tidbit. And that's what I would tell them when I called them. They would say, well, I don't know anything about the game. I said, yeah, but you could help me in other ways. What was Garfield like, growing up in Garfield? How was that like? Or in Miami? So I would kind of just try to, as any good reporter does, person A leads to person B. You just keep following that trail until you have your stuff. So
Yeah.
that's how I did it.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful, folks. City of Champions, Hank Gola, the author. Go on Amazon. Great reviews of it. It's wonderful. Jim Nantz gave you a review, which is on the cover. I'm sitting here looking at it right now. That's awesome. One of the things that I love about high school football, and I try to tell people this, and I think you would be a great person to expand upon this, which is back in the day, back in the time of this book, and before that, I mean, high school football was really the thing. It's what makes me love the game, right? It's the fabric of America. It's the fabric of communities, as you've already stated. But is it unfair to say at that point high school football was maybe supreme over the fledgling, what was then kind of a quasi pro football type of thing?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the one great thing resource that I had was that the newspapers of the time covered these high school teams as they covered professional teams. In fact, better, because the local papers like the Herald News Pacific, for instance, I mean, they covered the pros, but their bread and butter was these high school teams, and they covered them on a daily basis. And there were newspapers now, as we know, the industry's going down the tubes, but back then, there were so many suburban papers around, so many papers covering these teams, that I had a wealth of information and description to get to. And I'll tell you, back then, if you lived in Garfield, New Jersey, you probably didn't own a car. You worked in one of the woolen mills, right? Were you going to go? How were you going to get to the Polo Grounds to watch the Giants play? Or there's Rutgers was the local college. So you weren't going to go to Rutgers or Fordham. You didn't have the means to do it. So if you were going to watch a sporting event, high school football was there, and it was exciting, and it meant something. So that the entire community would turn out. Garfield in 1939 played to a total of 79,000 people for the season.
Wow. Which
is pretty remarkable when you think about it. And of course, the one game, the game that was supposed to decide the state championship, 19,000 people in Bloomfield, and it overflowed. People couldn't get into the games, but Foley Field in Bloomfield is kind of on a hillside, so maybe 5,000 more people were on the hillside. So probably 24,000 sets of eyes on that. In that, I think it was 38 or 39. The Chicago high school championship between the parochial and public champions of Chicago drew 100,000 people.
Yep.
Soldier Field. It was the thing, as you said. It was college football was big. That's obviously the bowl games, but particularly in those areas of the country where there was no college football, high school football reigned supreme.
Yep.
It really did.
And it still does in my mind. I guess I'm living a little bit back in the day too. But yeah, and when you mention Bloomfield, my mind goes back. I'm good friends with Chris Trapuka, whose dad Frank, of course, legendary, obviously out of Bloomfield, and his brothers Tracy and Todd going to Lafayette. So that just brought back a couple of memories there for me too as well. Hank Gola is on the line. City of Champions is the name of the book, talking about the 1939 Garfield High School team out of New Jersey, winning a national championship, beating Miami High, and we talked about how the game began, why it began, and why it was played. Next question, I guess, is you've heard all these stories, right, going into it. You said you were raised on it. You knew your first sporting event memory was about this Garfield team. So you've got all these stories, urban myth and all that happens in the world, even back in 1939. What, as you started researching, did you find was maybe more of a myth than it was fact? Any sort of little nuggets that made you chuckle and go, that's the way it happened?
Yeah. Well, there was always a story. Art Argauer was the coach of the Garfield team, and there was always a story that he went into the coal mines of Pennsylvania to pull players out.
It's a good area, though. We had good football in Pennsylvania. I'll brag about that, but go ahead.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. And that they were, he had a bunch of overage kids on his team. That turned out not to be true. Although because of the Depression, kids were in and out of school at the time. They drop out of school, work, help their family, make some money, come back in school. It was obviously a different sort of time. So the age limit was 20. In New Jersey, you could play up to the point once you turned 21, you were ineligible. So actually, some kids played half a season. They turned 21, they were ineligible.
Once you were allowed to drink, you couldn't play anymore.
Exactly. Yeah.
Go ahead.
You go fight in a war too in a couple of years.
That's true too. Yeah.
Yeah. But Florida's regulations were a bit. I think it was 1 year higher or something. Yeah. I think they did not have an age limit. That's what it was. Florida did not have an age limit. New Jersey did. In fact, Benny Babula, who was the star of the Jersey team, later played at Fordham, turned 21 on Christmas Eve. And in New Jersey, if that game was played in New Jersey, he would have been ineligible for the game. And as the two coaches were corresponding with each other, Jesse Yarborough, who was the Miami coach, quite a character, said, "I'll tell you what, you play your rules and we'll play ours." But of course, he was the main attraction. The two big stars of the game were both toe-headed kids. Davey Eldridge, who later played at Georgia Tech, was the little speedster, and he was the big play guy for Miami. And Babula was a power-running tailback, a triple threat, punted, passed, kicked, and out of the single wing. And they got national publicity going into the game. In the hype for the game, a couple of stories came out that it's the big guy against the little guy sort of thing, David against the Goliath.
Neat. Hank Gola on the line talking about his book, City of Champions. And I'm gonna bounce out of the book for just a second here, because before we started rolling the tape, Hank, you said, Jeff, the story you wrote here about New Jersey maybe finally getting to play for a real state championship instead of sectionals and bowl games, regional bowl games, or whatever they've tried. And it's always driven me crazy growing up across the river from Phillipsburg. But back to the real point. Yeah. In the story...
you grew up in Easton?
I grew up...
So you were... Yep. You were part of that big rivalry then.
Oh, nothing better than Turkey Day at Lafayette College between Easton and Peaburg, and I'm local if I call it Peaburg. It's or I can use the locals pronunciation, which is they kind of leave out some consonants and call it Phillipsburg. So anyway, with that being said, back to my question. So right now, as we're taping this, and this is on Wednesday, this is airing on Thursday, the state's schools are voting on changing the playoff system where they'll play down to an overall state championship maybe as early as 2022. And you told me in my story where I said, they had played to a state champion up until 1931. You said, Jeff, that's not necessarily correct. So let's collect things up here and correct the urban myth on that one.
Well, up till 1931, the NJSIAA, which was the governing body of high school sports in New Jersey, named a mythical overall state champion. And they did it basically Dickinson points. There was a Dickinson system, and whoever collected the most points they would name as the state champion. Well, they got too much flack for it from everywhere because there's always controversy no matter who you pick. So they said, well, basically the heck with it. We're not picking, and we're getting out of the business of naming a state champion. And they named sectional champions. Now, eventually, it's probably like this in every state, but there were four public groups: 1, 2, 3, 4 in New Jersey, and two parochial groups, A and B. And within those, sections. No, wait a minute, groups. I'm confusing myself here.
Well, the sections.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Right? Yeah, I got you. Okay. I know where you are.
1, 2,
I'll
3,
straighten
4,
this out.
Parochial A and B. And then there was North Section 1, North Section 2, Central Jersey, and South Jersey. So 4 different sections. And the NJSIAA would name, again, mythical champions in each of those sections. But never did anyone play off to even a sectional championship, let alone a state championship. So I guess what the NJSIA is trying to do now is trying to determine a state champion in each of those groups 1, 2, 3, 4, parochial A, B.
Doing it like every other state in the nation. They're catching up to 2021. Basically what they're doing.
A little behind.
Well, it is, and I always joke when people ask me about Jersey football, they're like, boy, I see a long list on your website of champions. Are they all state champions? I'm like, no, they're sectional champions, and the group and section thing will confuse anybody, even if you have some sort of high level degree in something. an engineer or whatever it may be. Hank Gola is on the line.
Yeah,
it's complicated, but the book is not complicated. It's straightforward. 1939, Garfield beats Miami High. Talking about the book, again, go to Amazon to check it out. We're going to talk at the end here of Hank's website where you can learn more about it. But so the game itself, obviously nowadays it's real easy when, Bergen Catholic goes out to play Mater Dei in Southern California. There was a good crowd there. I love seeing all those Jersey people sitting in the Southern California stands a couple of years ago. What was it like since the town was so hepped up on its Boilermakers and this game? I mean, was there good attendance? Did a lot of people head down to Miami? What did you find as far as, New Jersey's presence in the Orange Bowl?
Well, let me preface that by saying that they kind of screwed things up.
Oh, really? Go ahead.
Yeah, I imagine that. Yeah. The organizers, even though they said they were considering teams from across the country, Billings, Montana, Sioux City, Iowa, Casper, Wyoming, Brockton, Massachusetts, there was a number of teams. They're all listed in my book. I actually go with Boys Town, actually, was being considered at one point. Yeah. But they had their heart set because basically Grantland Rice was the chairman. It was a lot of New York area guys. They figured that to draw the best attendance in Miami, a New York City team would be great, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they had their heart set on picking a New York City team. Garfield was obvious. It may be across the river from New York City, but it was not considered a New York City team, and New York people still look down their noses at us. But that's a story for another day. But the problem was New York had a rule. The PSAL had a rule, and actually the state had a rule that you were prohibited from playing games, extracurricular games after the season, and you were prohibited from traveling a certain amount of miles from the school. So, they figured they were going to get around that, but they didn't. They brought in Mayor LaGuardia came in at the end and tried to say, "Hey, look, the game's okay. Let these kids go." They eventually picked a team from Seward Park High School, which was in the Bowery. They called them the dead end zone kids. They were those kind of guys. And, it was in the Jewish ghetto of Manhattan, and they had their uniforms. There was all sorts of sob stories about it. So this would be a great team to send down to Miami, even though they probably would have gotten their rear ends kicked around a little bit because I don't think they were as good. But they were going to send this team down. When all this came up and said, no, you can't, then Mayor LaGuardia tries to come in at the last minute and says, please send these kids. It's okay with me. And they said, well, it may be okay with you, but it's not okay with the Board of Regents. The governor got involved. Governor Lehman got involved. He was told the same thing. So they changed the format, and then they were going to send a high school all-star team from the metropolitan area. There were two guys from Garfield that were named to it, Babula and Gremwitz, and the coach was one of the assistant coaches. And this went on for a couple of days. They had a couple of practices until the New York State authorities came in again and said, look, anybody in this who plays on this team might put their high school diploma in jeopardy, or at least that was the rumor. So that game quickly fell apart. So Garfield was kind of the last contingency, and that's how they ended up getting in the game. But in the meantime, all the time that could have been spent selling tickets, promoting the game, was lost. Mm. And when they thought that they would, originally they said they were going to fill the Orange Bowl with like 30,000 people. And it ended up being, I don't know, the attendance was 13 or 14,000. And Miami had been playing so many good, they had a Southern championship game. I mean, maybe people were a little footballed out by the time. And the fact that, the game wasn't hyped as well as it could have been hurt the attendance. Now, Garfield people actually did go down there pretty well. I guess there were maybe a couple of thousand who made the trip. Some by thumb, some by car, some by thumb, some by train. Team went down by train, brought its own water.
By thumb. I haven't thought of a hitchhiker in a while. That's good. I like that. And it was Christmas night, too. I mean, I consider that a Christmas gift. I'm a football nut, a high school football nut, but I guess Christmas night was not necessarily the right date, right?
I don't know, because it was a prelude. The Orange Bowl was being played a week later.
Right.
It seemed to be a good date for it.
Makes
Miami
sense.
had always traditionally played a Christmas game. Miami High had played a Christmas game since 1930.
Oh, neat.
And they basically gave that game. It wasn't designated as a national championship game, but it was kind of like the high school Rose Bowl. Teams would vie to go down to Miami and play on this Christmas Day game. So it was a tradition in Miami.
Oh,
So,
that's a wonderful
it fell in
nugget.
that way.
That's a wonderful nugget, Hank. And folks, just things like that. The book is just wonderful. City of Champions. Hank Gola, the author, joining us tonight as we wind things down here on the High School Football America podcast. Let's talk about Benny Babula, the 22-yard field goal that wins it. So you got several thousand Jerseyites there in the stands, probably going crazy. And I like some of the ways that the info got back to New Jersey, to the Garden State. Talk about the coverage of the game. That's and by the way, folks, if you're listening on iHeart or Apple Podcasts, go to highschoolfootballamerica.com. There's video of this. There's actual black and white video. But go ahead with my question. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, they filled school number 8 in Garfield, the gym. In fact, the crowd just it spilled into the halls and everything. And on stage, they read ticker tape reports from the game.
Love it.
And Western Union, you could imagine the ticker coming across, and then the guy on the stage reading the play-by-play, and the place would go nuts, and with a good play by Garfield or whatever. And Babula, who kicked the winning field goal with 2 minutes left, it was the only field goal that he had even attempted in his high school career. It was also the only field goal kick that year, the first since the previous years, and I'm talking about college too, the first since the previous year's Orange Bowl when the kicker from Tennessee kicked a field goal. Field goals were as rare as snowflakes in Miami. Let's use that. So, and the urban myth that you grew up with in Garfield was that, but when Babula kicks the field goal and the guy reads it over the ticker tape, that everybody in the place started jumping up and down and created a crack in the school foundation.
Guess that didn't happen.
I went to look for it. I found some chip paint. That's about the only thing I could find, chip paint. There was no crack, but that was what we learned. The other myth was that Babula drop kicked it. He did not. It was a placement. And it was held by John Grembowitz, who actually came into the game, wasn't the regular holder. He was a star, but he didn't hold on the field goal. And he happened to hold on this field goal, and Babula booted it through.
How wonderful
cool.
How wonderful is it that there is some black and white footage from that game? I mean, I've watched it. It's amazing. Again, like you said, just uncovering stuff.
Well, the thing also. There were, if you look through the book, there are so many pictures and illustrations that we're able to use because, again, it was publicized throughout the country. So there were press photos that were taken and sent out on the wires before the game. So I have I have some action photos. I have some still photos. I have they took the Garfield team out on a boat. I have the kids. They assigned them co-eds from Miami High, which is kind of cool. When I spoke to the team from Garfield 2 years ago, and when I told them that they were each everybody was arranged with a co-ed for the week. That's the best thing
Boys will be boys.
I thought that was fantastic, right? So, but it was they were wined and dined like no other time in their lives. But So, again, Babula is and today, if you go into Garfield today, people still know who Babula is. The legend has remained.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book, folks. And I always talk about this whenever I try to do things. Yes, if you have a blank canvas, the blank canvas is football we're painting on, but the real story is not the game itself. It's everything around it, the community. Then how America was. It's a great read, folks. I highly recommend it. Hank Gola on here wrapping up with us, and let's talk. The last part of it, which is the business part. You don't write a book just hoping that I guess some people do. I didn't. I wanted to make a little bit of money on it. So how can people, aside, I mentioned Amazon, but you've got a website and that. Talk a little about the business side of it and how people can get involved and understand more of what you did to get into this book and get it written.
Yeah, well, Amazon's the main. Amazon's the easiest place to go to get it. But BarnesandNoble.com also has it, and some of the other places, Indies.com, any site, Books A Million, all their internet sites have it. If there are bookstores that are still open these days,
I was in one the other day, Books A Million, as a matter of fact, looking for something my mom couldn't find online. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, but the easiest way is online. Also, my website, www.hankgola.com, has supplemental information on each chapter, including video. I have, you talk about the black and white video, I have color film from the Garfield Passaic game of 1939, where Babula runs for 193 yards, and that is just remarkable. Any high school football fan out there, you really should watch this. It's the single wing. It's beautiful. The single wing was such a beautiful formation. The choreography of it was great. The precision of the blocking, and this really shows it beautifully. So I recommend going to my website, and then each chapter has its little information. When I talk about the polio scare, I have something on polio and all that stuff. So it's just extra supplemental information. So I highly recommend that as you're reading the book to kind of go to my website and look up the supplemental information. But that will also get you to all the places that sell the book as well. You could just click on there and get it.
Good. So. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. Before I let you go here, I'd be remiss because when I was writing my book, my Wind Beneath My Wings, Trish, took a whole lot of time to do various things to make sure the book got done properly from editing on down. And before we roll the tape here, you said your wife did too, so let's give her a little shout out here because your name's at the bottom of it, but she deserves a little bit of credit.
Yeah, well, I did. I gave her a little shout out in the acknowledgement.
I know.
No, my wife Lillian really, there's so many parts of writing a book, and one of the parts that you put aside, you do these interviews, and then I don't want to transcribe it. Well, I'll do it. Well, it piled up. I had like 80-something hours of interviews to transcribe.
And that's a bear, folks. But go ahead, Hank. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, as I said, a half-hour interview basically takes at least an hour to transcribe. That's the way it goes. And she just pitched in and did them for me. And without her, I would not have made my deadline. So that was indispensable. So she gets a big credit for that.
Yep, the wind beneath our wings is very, very important. Even just putting up with us taking so much time as it takes away to do all of that stuff. Hank Gola, City of Champions, thank you for joining us. Folks, go online and buy this book. You won't be disappointed. It's from a bygone era, but if you're a high school football fan, it will give you those rich memories that are the reason you enjoy the game itself. So, Hank, thanks for taking the time to join us, and best of luck. Hopefully this helps you sell a couple of books, but great job on it.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on because it's really important that we get the word out to people. People don't know about it, and you have to know about it to be able to read it. And most of the people who read it love it. So hopefully some people out there will pick it up and get into it. And let me know, too. I mean, you go on my website, you give me some feedback about what you think. And if you find any errors or anything like that, just let me know.
Oh, trust me, in this day and age, people will let you know when there's an error or three in there, right? But,
okay, but I want them authenticated. I need
oh, you just can't make things up?
Proof. No. We're not,
well,
we're not doing that.
No, I know. I'm just teasing you about that. But no, I know. And you fixed me up. You taught me something today, which is the history of New Jersey state championships. So I appreciate that. Well, thanks again, Hank.
All right, Jeff. I appreciate you having me on again. Thank you very much.
The High School Football America podcast is brought to you by the great new app, Small Player, Big Play, an age-appropriate, sports-focused social media platform designed to showcase and connect young athletes, parents, coaches, and their friends. On Small Player, Big Play, young athletes have the ability to utilize the app and share their interests and accomplishments in a very safe, and this is important, a very highly secure social media environment. It features live streaming with game day highlights, and I love this part of it, lucrative fundraising opportunities for your school and your team. Download the Small Player Big Play app on Google Play and the Apple App Store. That's today's High School Football America podcast, and I'm Jeff Fisher.